Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to welcome Victoria Mellor to the show. Victoria was initially a foreign language teacher and then an editor and then launched Melcrum just over 30 years ago, events and communications business. Since then, she's launched and exited a number of businesses. So as a multiple founder, a mentor, an investor, an advisor, and a keen mountaineer, which I'm going to ask some questions about later. But before we get into that, welcome to the show and thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
So I always like to start right back at the beginning. So obviously you'd had a couple of years teaching English at a business school in Spain. Then you were an editor. What was the point where you went, you know what, I think I can do this myself?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think there are two things really. I think I was, I was working as an editor. I'm quite a curious person, and I was always sort of working on what's next in my head. And I think I must have walked into my boss's office and said, I'm really bored. I'm going to leave unless you send me to the States. And he's quite surprisingly, given how young I was at the time, he said yes. And Robin, my now husband and business partner, came with me and we set up an office for Armstrong, which was a small B2B publisher. And that gave me a massive amount of scope to sort of really investigate some of the ideas I had at the time. So it was really a combination of boredom and curiosity. But I remember thinking very clearly, I looked around me at, friends from university and people who had corporate jobs. And I just thought, I had no idea how you do a corporate job. How do you do the same thing every day? How do you follow a job description? I just recognized that wasn't part of my DNA. And there's that, I think people like me constantly think I'm going to get fired because I was finding it very hard to do the repetitive tasks that, are required. So the good thing was when we were in the US, I did a lot of traveling. I did a lot of conference speaking about the topic that we were covering at the time. And I recognized that there was a huge opportunity. And I went back to my boss and I said, there is a huge opportunity. And he dismissed the idea. And I think part of me is always really keen to prove people wrong. So I quit and we set up the business with the publication, which was a B2B subscription publication.
That's so interesting. I think every single founder I talk to cites curiosity, and also that I remember, when I left university, friends very gleefully announced they've got graduate placements at the big four consulting firms, and doing management consultancy and showing me their laptops and spreadsheets. And it just kind of filled me with horror.
Yeah.
And also the amount of people that say to their boss, I've got an idea here. And the boss goes, that's not part of the plan. That's not part of the strategy. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go and do it then. So anyway, so you had a very clear idea. Did you end up doing exactly what you thought you were going to do? Or was it something quite similar and related? People say they often poke around in corners a bit before they land exactly on the right formula. So how was it for you when you first started?
Well, I think, we were fairly young. I mean, this is 30 years ago when we started the business. So I think we were really just operating with what we knew, which wasn't very much at the time. And I think, it's an interesting one because I'd identified this opportunity and a problem that needed solving. And the only means I knew at the time to address that was through a publication with articles. I think, if I was doing this today, I wouldn't have chosen that route because there are so many other ways to address that problem. So I think we really did. I knew that there was an opportunity. I knew that we had the skills that we and the connections. I mean, the contacts to actually sort of start that publication. So I think it was really about. The first thing was not really wanting to work for anyone else, wanting to prove that this idea had legs. I don't think we went into it with big goals. I think we just wanted to prove that and actually make a living for ourselves initially. And I mean, I love the fact that Bootstrap Confidential is about bootstrapping because it was so intrinsic to our method of working. I mean, I initially borrowed £10,000 from my brother, who was a successful barrister, and with that money, we bought a desktop Mac, which back then was like the piece of kit you had to have to produce a publication, a fax machine, and the rest of the money went on the first direct mailing. We hadn't actually produced the product yet. We had produced the marketing. And because we had worked in the States, we actually initially launched the product in the US. So
Okay.
we mailed a huge amount to a database that we'd built in the US. And thankfully that worked. And we started getting subscription revenue through. And we used, subscription models are great. We all know that, you can fund a lot of your growth through prepayments. And we did that. And we actually didn't borrow any other money throughout our whole history. We took a small investment from our, we recruited a chair who wanted to invest through SEIS. So we took a small investment from him, but we actually didn't really need the money. And we funded all of our growth throughout the whole history of the business, 20 years, through our own cash. So bootstrapping became a way of operating for us. We never thought we're going to go and get big investment, because I think, our whole attitude to business was, we'll experiment, we'll find opportunities, and we'll find ways to fund them ourselves. But that's basically down to following a subscription, having a subscription business with prepayments.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are many benefits to bootstrapping, not least the fact that, like you, I started my first business in the 90s when the whole concepts of like seeding rounds, like angels, they just didn't exist outside Silicon Valley. So, and running a startup wasn't something you boasted about. People looked at you with deep sympathy when you told them what you were doing. But the discipline it bakes into your DNA, I think, is often underestimated because it does stop you going off on flights of fancy. It gives you a financial rigor and clarity about what you're going to do that you don't get in any other form.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the business I work with now, I chair a business and we're going through a big transformation at the moment. And that's involving a huge tech build. But I have said to them, because you have that inevitable horse trading conversation about, what we can afford to do now and what we can't afford to do, we'll have to push that back into next year. And there was quite a lot of tension about this conversation. But I said, look, this is good. This is a good conversation because it's forcing us to constantly evaluate what is going to be the thing that makes a difference to our customers. And I think that discipline of having those very robust conversations and always doing things that that will make a difference to customers, is the discipline that you need. And I think teaching people that is a good thing. It's not just, we're running out of money. Well, we're not running out of money. We're managing our situation very carefully, but it's the discipline of that, which I think is very, very important.
It does give you a great sense of making sure that you have a control on your spend and you're only spending where you're getting the maximum bang for your buck for your
That's
customers.
right. That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I said, everyone mentions curiosity. Everyone says, I wanted to be my own boss. Everyone says I wanted to prove a point. These are kind of common traits when I talk to founders. So if you kind of step back and think about, are there specific things that make a good entrepreneur that mean that certain people who start a business are perhaps slightly more likely to succeed than others, or what are some of the commonalities you see when you talk to other founders, and also as a multiple founder and as a mentor and stuff? What do you see and think? Okay, they've probably got a bit of that, and that's a good thing.
Yes, I mean it's a great question because I think back then I didn't know a lot about myself. I just knew that I wasn't cut out for corporate life in exactly same way as you described. I mean, I was diagnosed with ADHD about 6 years ago, and that suddenly made total sense to me. And it would have been quite useful to have known that. But I mean, going back to your original question, I think in me, and I actually looked up the diagnosis document that that sort of described me, and it's all to do with entrepreneurship. So, curiosity is huge driver for me. But it's also about curiosity and pattern recognition. So, I see things that other people don't see often, and sometimes I find it very difficult to sort of understand why they can't see those things. But I think people like me are very good at divergent thinking. So, that's often known as big picture thinking, but it's also about making connections between things that aren't necessarily obvious. And I think, and we all know ADHD is quite misunderstood, but often the ability to make connections is one of the traits in entrepreneurs. So they'll see something, and I call them weak signals. So you often see patterns of things that aren't
Yeah.
necessarily significant, but they are significant to me, and there'll often be a game-changing idea there. And I will see it very, very clearly, and it often takes me a long time to convince other people that is the way. And I think people think, oh, entrepreneurs are risk takers or they're highly impulsive. I'm actually not. I need a huge amount of data to make a decision. So I do need to have that, that collection of bits of data to be able to make a decision. And I will go and get those bits of data. But I think, I'm quite impatient. I'm quite high energy. So I think I also read people very well. I think, I've got an ability to sort of understand people and what they're about, and read the room. I mean, I can read the room very accurately. I can understand, I'm very empathetic, so I have that ability to sort of really understand where people are coming from and what their needs are. So as a byproduct that I am a very good coach. I am a very good, I have ability to sort of really understand people and what they're about. So really, all in all, I'm not very good at the convergent thinking tasks, which isn't a surprise. Things that require logic and repetition, but that's not a deal breaker. Had a very good FD. I know the right questions to ask. But I think problem solving as well is a huge part of being able to start a business and succeed. You've got to
Yeah.
be able to think in the moment. I'm very good in a crisis. So if there is a crisis, I am at my absolute very best, which is why a lot of people with ADHD, work in emergency medicine or journalism, or they work at the bar because they have that ability to problem solve and think in the moment under pressure.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I was diagnosed by accident when I took my son for a diagnosis, and like you, it all made sense. But the
Yeah,
pattern recognition and the weak signals is I think fascinating because quite often, I mean, 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. And there's the phrase, everyone has a solution looking for a problem, but quite
yeah,
often people go out saying, oh, I think I found this gap in the market, or, to which the first question is there a market in the gap? But
yeah,
if it was as easy as just going out and saying, what's the gap and getting a strong signal of here's a gap and we need this, then there would be 100% success rate or a 5% failure rate rather than
yeah,
95%
yeah,
failure rate.
yeah.
So that ability to listen to the weak signals, I think and again, whilst neurodiversity might give you a head start on that, it also comes down to practice and experience. The more time you spend having those conversations and trying to hear the weak signals, the better you get at spotting them and at stringing them
That's right.
together and
That's
and
right.
having a having an idea off the back of it that you can then go back to saying it seems to me like this is the problem here. But you spoke about your skills, your divergent skills, and obviously needing convergent skills, and you said you had a co-founder. So how important do you think a co-founder is, and what are the advantages of having a or multiple co-founders versus being a solo founder?
Yeah, I mean, it was critical for us. I mean, so I started working with my now husband. We weren't married at the time, we were colleagues, but I think, he compliments me hugely because he has the ability to, he's a completer finisher, so he will, be able to take plans and see them through. I could visualize the plan, I can articulate the plan. He has the skills to be able to say, okay, these are things we're going to do. Let's write the plan. But yes, I mean, for us, it was critical, and we had a successful business partnership that lasted. Well, still have a successful business partnership that has lasted, 35 years now. So, but for us, it was critical. I think without having that person beside me, so I talked about data. and I need data to make decisions, he would be the one who provide me the data, the financial data or the,
Yeah.
the customer data. And yes, it also helped because I think, because we were a unit, we obviously, and then became a family unit, we could flex when each other needed flex. We're a team. I mean, we are a very good
Yeah.
partnership. And we do everything 50-50. Ever since the very beginning, we paid ourselves 50-50. We take on the family responsibilities 50-50. There was always a balance and a sense that we are a team and we work well together, and that we understood each other well. So yes, I mean, I think for me, not having that person would have made it very difficult to actually operationalize what I wanted to do. Yes,
I mean,
definitely.
there's obviously, as you said, the benefits of complementary skills. If you go, myself and my business partner had completely different skills, and that was fantastic. But there's also the piece where when you're in the fire, it's nice to have someone in the fire with you that you can talk. So you know, one thing that founders always say when they first started is their sort of surprise at like how exhausting it is and the mental resilience that's required and the amount of rejection you get and everything. So firstly, how did you deal with that individual as a person? And then secondly, like how beneficial, it's obviously beneficial to have someone with you dealing with that, but how did you work that?
Yeah, I mean it's very true, and I think yes, I mean we obviously spent a lot of time talking about the business when we were building the business, and I think we I mean we found a very good advisor very early on in the days where there were things called business links, which was actually a very useful little agency that the government run to help support entrepreneurs, and we ended up with the chief executive of Business Link as our initial business advisor. And he became a very useful, I mean, slash marriage guidance counselor, I suppose. But I think it's important to also have somebody who you're talking to. So we always had some sort of coach. That changed throughout the evolution of the business, but we did support each other. I am very good in a crisis. I will be the person who will sort of, lead and step up and get people through a crisis. He's very good at in the more routine tasks. But having said that, I think to keep us both, to keep the communication flowing in a way, in a healthy way, we also always had a coach. And I think that's really important because it's hard. It's very hard. And you do need the resilience. And sometimes resentments can build up or, frustrations that this person doesn't really understand. And having a coach who can just filter through some of those, you know, areas that could lead to, fallings out. I mean, we are thankfully very, we're very sort of level-headed people mostly, but that was really important as well as having the co-founder relationship.
I want to come back to mentors in a minute, but you talk about how you're good in a crisis. I sense probably thrive in a crisis and quite enjoy a crisis.
Yeah.
So how much of the growth that you had effectively came down to, okay, we've got this going here. You operationalize this. I'm now kicking my heels and feeling a bit bored. So I'm going to go and grow over here. And do you think I know you're a keen mountaineer and lots of, not all, but lots of entrepreneurs tend to like the more, skiing, mountaineering, diving, skydiving,
Yeah.
all sorts of different things. Do you think there's a link between that kind of like need for stimulation and excitement that you might get from a slightly more extreme sport as opposed to playing paddle or something, and what helps drive growth as a business?
As a result, yeah, I mean that's great. I do love all of those things, not just mountaineering. Although I'm getting older and I'm creaking a bit, but yes, the mountain analogy is really interesting because I think it makes you feel alive. It's the stimulation that you need, and it also is it's an unknown journey. I mean, adventure is actually a really hugely important part of being an entrepreneur. It is an adventure, and you don't really know what you're going to get. So on a trip in the mountains, you might you might have bad weather, you might have, somebody's injured, you might have something that you have to overcome. But the challenge of getting to the top, and it's not just getting to the top, it's seeing these new ridges on the horizon that emerge. I think that's the analogy I would say, that there's another thing over there
Yeah.
that is there to conquer. And I think that horizon, if you like, of overcoming adversity and then finding something new was a very recognized pattern in our business. So I'll give you some examples. I think, we were doing very well. We had a great subscription base, the old-fashioned way of direct mail, subscription forms coming through nicely. We'd built a very nice subscription base of big corporates, which was working very well. And then 9/11 came along, which was pretty awful because we had some employees who were in DC. Thankfully, they weren't they weren't affected. But actually after that came the anthrax scare, which
Yeah.
a lot of people may not remember this, but it was a terrorist scare that involved people putting anthrax spores, which are obviously highly contagious and fatal, into the post. And we
It
had
was in
just,
Mars, wasn't it, as well?
yes, there was a few different things, but for us, it was about the mail in the US. And so we just put enormous amount of mail in the US postal system. I think it was like $200,000 worth of direct marketing. And of course, it had a Belgian postmark, which for us at the time meant it was like an interesting piece of mail that you'd open because we used a mailing house in Belgium. And obviously during the anthrax scares, this is highly suspicious mail. It has to go in
Yeah, I
the
can
bin.
imagine.
And we suddenly had 12 weeks with no sales coming in, which was pretty awful. And these are the days before digital. You couldn't do anything about it. You just had to sit there going, oh God, what are we going to do next? But actually that meant, and for our customers who are professional communicators, that period was very challenging for them too. So we immediately, went back to customers and said, right, what is happening in your business right now? And off the back of that, we launched a whole range of, workshops that we could get out of, we could launch within weeks, and that, that evolution, even though now it doesn't sound, particularly exciting, for us it was a new venture. So that crisis of having no sales coming through, which is pretty awful, made us think differently, and we started a whole other line of products off the back of that. But I think the most important thing is that we always had a very good way of reaching customers. So
Yeah.
I've always had this, I think a lot of publishers, a lot of B2B businesses define themselves by what they do. We run events, or we have a digital, we have a data business. And I've never thought like that. I've always thought, okay, I have this group of customers. We were very lucky. We had a group of global customers in very good businesses. And it was about solving problems for them
Yeah.
always. And so we always had this ability to really understand, and we had ways of doing that. We used to get them together in meetings, and I had very good relationships with a lot of my customers, but that got us through these terrible crises. I mean, likewise, by the time the financial crisis came along, we had a very nice training business, and I think we lost contracts worth 750K straight off the back of the financial crisis, because the three big banks that our top clients just said, we're just cutting all of this money. And so, we went through another existential crisis at that point, and realized that we needed to sort of, at that point, we were thinking much more around the enterprise relationship rather than individuals, and that created that shift. So they were
Yeah.
all points of, big crisis. How do we get through this? How do we make ourselves think differently? So yes, you can trace our evolution through, growth, crisis, growth, crisis, growth. Yeah.
Yeah, there's there's the phrase "never waste a good crisis."
No,
And I think it's the
no,
urban myth that the Chinese symbol for crisis is danger and opportunity combined, which I've researched, and that is just an urban myth. But it's a
that's
very
it.
useful thing to think about. But for any founders listening, like so often, like you get up and running, you got to start up, it's up and running, you're starting to get some cash flow in, you're starting to build the team. You've got some big ambitions for next year. You go with what you think your clients want. It might be one client I was talking to who's just opened up in the US and fallen flat on their face, or I remember we decided we were going to go into a market and it just did not work. But what are some of what are some of the first things that are found like, okay, you've had this big idea, it hasn't worked. You've got to kind of pick the team up because everybody's feeling deflated. You've got to recalibrate. You've got to redo your cash flow. What are some of the things that a founder who's only a few years into the journey should focus on to kind of make sure that they do turn that into an opportunity and into a success,
Yeah.
rather than just sitting there looking deflated and going, well, that didn't work. What's next?
My philosophy was always to be as open book as I could with the business. So, I mean, obviously there are bits of data that you can't share, but actually teaching people about business was actually a very, very important part of our culture. And being as open book and teaching them how the business worked created a different kind of culture. And also, I think we also hired people with a growth mindset. So, I would always test that when I'm hiring people. I think growth mindset is very difficult to create if you don't have it.
Yes.
And so I think being open about things makes it much easier to corral a team and say, we need to do something about this. And, just being that kind of vulnerable leader who doesn't always have all the answers and is asking the team for the answers. I've never been I am a very good leader, but good leadership is not being a big ego and standing up at the front of the room. It's about having that conversation and the relationship that we had with people meant that people would put their hands up and say, I think this. It was very open. There wasn't, and also I think that when we did go through crisis, people would also volunteer, because
Yeah.
we created this culture of openness. So
And
yeah,
was that a deliberate, was that something that
yes,
happened organically because that's your personalities, or you went, we want to have a very open culture where people feel free to raise their hands up?
yeah,
And I mean, I always think that the key to success for any business that's growing quickly is making sure that everybody in the team feels empowered to put their hand up at any
yeah,
point and say, this isn't working, or this
yeah,
is, I mean, because as you're growing quickly, processes and things that were working, communications stop working because suddenly you've got bigger and you've got more complexity and everything.
yeah,
And if people don't say there's a problem here and we need to fix this, and if they're scared of saying that because they think someone might actually, say, why are you causing problems? Then things are going to break, and your ability
yeah.
to grow is simply your ability to have the whole team spot mistakes and find the optimal solution as quickly as possible. But did you deliberately set out at the start to create that culture, or did it kind of happen organically?
No, no, I think it was always deliberate. I mean, we actually worked in employee communication, so it was almost a case of cobbler's children. We had to do this
Yeah.
well, but I was interested in it. But also, I had there was a very good consultant in the US who used to talk about open book culture. His name's Jim Schaefer. It was a big thing back in the 90s, but I think has been lost a little bit. But being open book means that there's much more of a sense of ownership about things. And I also think that, any good leader should be able to create a culture where people have a very clear idea of the part they play in the success of the business. And if that is not clear or it's blurry, that's when people start to get disengaged from the sort of, the direction and the mission. So people still need to be able to say, okay, what's my job? Who do I work with? How do we contribute to the success? What's in it for me? And then how do I help? Those are all the questions that a manager or a leader has to answer for a team, pretty regularly to have a team that is, functioning correctly. And I do think I see companies now, remote working's lost a lot of that sort of closeness. COVID's lost a lot of that closeness, but it's still incredibly important. And investing the time in that was really important. Even when we were big, I would always have a quarterly one-on-one with every single employee in the business because I wanted to know what they thought, and I would invest that time with people because without that clarity, I couldn't really understand. And obviously, when you get bigger, that turns into other ways of collecting data. But I found, that I have a huge sense of responsibility for people as well. So I feel that responsibility for people quite keenly, and I want them to be fit. I want them to feel good about what they're doing.
It's also a good business practice as well, because if people are feeling like they're engaged and they're growing and they're f fulfilling their career aspirations and goals,
Yeah,
they're going to be much more engaged and positive and willing to work the longer hours and
yeah,
less likely to leave.
exactly, exactly.
So yeah, it's good business sense as well. But you said you interviewed for the growth mindset. And I remember it took us years to work out how to interview for the growth mindset with lots of missteps. So what are a couple of the questions you would ask someone to try, or how would you try and pin down, does someone have a growth mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and we'd make a lot of money if we could sell this to businesses. I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
I think it's just showing an interest in people about what they do, and I remember one of the first employees I hired. Said at the end of the interview, what else do what else do I need to know about you? And she's like, I can run really fast, and I just thought that's hilarious. That you actually, I mean, it's a silly joke, but it was about there's something about her. I do read people well, I recognise, but I think you can tell from a growth mindset about what they're doing, how they spend their spare time, their attitude to, global events, for instance. You can ask them things. It's very difficult to put it in a work setting for me. I think
Yeah.
I would always look around me a little bit for that kind of growth mindset. But also, we use profiling tools. We used Belbin, which I thought was very good, and then we use something called predictive index, which again I found incredibly helpful. And those tools also give you a profile of person who is good at selling ideas as opposed to good at selling features. And the people who are good at selling ideas tend to have that kind of growth mindset.
Yeah.
So we did use formal tools to find that out about people as well. And that was a very, very good. I mean, my predictive index profile starts with, Victoria openly challenges the world around her, which makes me sound like a complete nightmare. But that profiling tool is very good at. It was originally developed as a risk profiling tool for fighter pilots during the Second World War.
Yeah.
So it's very good at finding that angle, and especially when you're hiring salespeople. And in our world, we needed people who could sell ideas.
Yeah, as opposed to just selling a product and
Yes,
then coming
exactly.
back saying, I've lost page 5 that tells me how to answer this objection.
That's right. So,
Yeah.
so that for us was that growth mindset aspect of it. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned mentors, and just quickly, like, how important are mentors for founders, do you think, and where should you go and find them?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we use several different ways. I think we had Business Link at the very beginning, and then when I think when we'd been about, I think it was probably 6 or 7 years into the business, I went off to do a program at Cranfield University, which was for entrepreneurs. It's called the Business Growth Program. It was excellent because I really recognised that I had no training. I had no real knowledge, and it was a program for entrepreneurs who had reached a certain level of turnover. So I think back in those days, it was sort of 1.5 million pounds. And it was almost like a mini MBA, but it was very hands-on. And the people who ran that program were really very, very good. And we had a mentor who we continued the relationship with that mentor for quite a long time. And then, and your needs change over time. And when we actually started to think more, the transformation we needed to make after the financial crisis was thinking in a very different way, and recognizing that we needed to bring some new thinking into the business at that point meant that, the mentorship changed.
Yeah.
But always, I think my my red flag with people when I meet them now, because I mentor people now, is whether they are coachable.
So I literally I did a podcast literally a couple of days ago where the very first thing they said was the most important thing is that you are coachable. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting that you hone in on that, and it's such a key point.
So that is that, the self-awareness that you need to find in someone is the element of being coachable. So I think the people who I meet who are successful entrepreneurs are self-aware enough to know when, things need to change or when they need to step back. It's sort of it's a gut feeling. I don't have a big ego. I'm very happy to share power, to bring on people. I never had a problem with that. But yes, the being coachable, i.e., seeing someone having a conversation, going away and reflecting on that, and actually doing something off the back of that, that is highly unusual. Some people I meet, use coaching as a way of just offloading, but actually you don't see any personal change off the back of it. So unless you can identify that that person is actually thinking about what you've said and then doing something differently, and these are hard things to do, but you need to be able to see that intention.
Yeah.
And that's often, you don't see that really until you're sort of 6 months into a coaching relationship.
Yeah,
Um,
I often say to founders, like, when you start your business, take your ego, put it in a suitcase, lock the suitcase, take the suitcase up, put it in the attic and lock the attic, and don't go there again for 10
yeah,
years until you've exited. Because ego is like oil and water. Ego
yeah,
and running a startup it just will crash very, very badly.
yeah,
But if you could, you have a time machine now, and if you could hop in the time machine and you could go back 30 years to 95, 96, and meet yourself just as you're about to launch the magazine, what would be the one or two pieces of advice that you would give yourself 30 years ago that would have made things easier, smoother, quicker to grow? What was the one thing? "Oh, if I'd just known that one thing, that would have
yeah.
helped so much in advance." What would you say to yourself?
Well, I think I'd be kinder to myself. I think a lot of females are not kind to themselves. They're quite hard on themselves. I'm actually not a competitive person. But I'm competitive. I set myself very high goals. So I think just being kinder to myself, and also saying you're okay. You've got this amazing superpower. So, it would have been useful to know at the time that that was actually okay to be like I was. I think
Yes.
as there was a lot of there's a whole part of me that was quite insecure because I was this very different animal, in my family. I'm very different from my siblings, for example. So there was always that feeling that I was very different, but I didn't really know why. But now, if someone had said, this is a gift, go and do
Yeah.
it, I probably would have been much more confident about my ability, and actually harnessing that more. Because I think, you can get, you people with ADHD, by the time they've left school, they've received 20,000 negative comments about themselves. I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
So, even though you've got this drive, you've also got this very negative perception of yourself, mostly from the education system, being told by teachers that, you're not good enough, or you don't concentrate, or stop fidgeting, or doing this. So I think that for me, that was the major thing. It's more of a personal thing. But I think we made some missteps at the beginning, thinking that we were a publishing company, and so we launched lots of different titles, and then there was this real, very important moment where I'd done this program at Cranfield, and I said we're just going to focus on communications. So we actually sold the other two titles that we published, and then followed this very different strategy of getting very close to our customers, and went through a transformation of publishing B2B information through to much more of a research advisory, very
Yeah.
deep, very high value relationship with our customers. So, we went from an average price point of several £100s through to several, tens of thousands of pounds. I think if I'd had the confidence, I would have done that sooner.
Okay.
I think we had a lot of great skills on the team. We had this very, very, very deep understanding of our customers, some great customer relationships. It took a lot of persuading other people. It took a lot of mindset change to say, look, we've got this great relationship with our customers. There's a big opportunity to be a different kind of business. So that took a while, but I think I would have done that sooner. As
Okay.
I said, that
And
was,
we're almost out of time. So one
yeah.
final question, which I like to ask, and hopefully is motivational to any founder listening. Like, what's the single biggest joy of being a founder? If you had to sum it up in a nutshell, like, the joy of being a founder is.
Yeah, it's really the freedom to explore for me. That's a real sense of adventure, that this is actually, it's a ride and we're having fun. I think when you're in that initial startup phase, the highs are amazing and the lows are also very low, but it's the highs that keep you going. It's that sense of, we've got our first sale. I love sales. Making sales is,
Yeah.
what gives you that energy to,
It's like getting off the top of the roller coaster. It's that
yeah,
moment where you've gone all the way up and just at the top you suddenly
yeah,
start dropping down. It's that huge
exactly,
adrenaline
exactly.
rush. But we're unfortunately out of time. There were so many other things I wanted to talk about. We should perhaps do it at a later stage. But Victoria, thank you very much for coming on as a guest and sharing all your learnings and insights over the last 30 years. It was absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
No, Charles, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.